Snow muffled the forest like a held breath. Then a single broken sound tore through the silence. Atlas, the German shepherd, was already moving, muscles coiled, paws cutting through the drifts, before Ethan could call his name. Ethan knew that sound. It wasn't alert. It wasn't curiosity. It was fear. Human fear. He followed without thinking, crashing through frozen reeds and low branches, flashlight trembling in his grip. The wind cut like glass. Snow stung his face. Somewhere ahead, something was wrong in a way the forest itself could not hide. Then he saw her, half submerged beneath the ice, sinking where mud and winter met, fingers clawing at nothing. Her lips were blue, her eyes were wide, not just with terror, but with the knowledge that she had been chased there. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted the cold to finish what they started, and as Atlas stood between her and the dark, Ethan realized the storm wasn't the real danger tonight. The real threat was already close and listening. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because some cries are only heard by those willing to run toward the cold. Your support truly means everything to us. Snow fell steadily over the upper peninsula, thick and dry, whitening the pines, muting the marsh, and pressing the late afternoon into an early, reluctant night. The old ranger station stood at the edge of the frozen wetlands like a thing that had decided, long ago, to stop asking to be remembered. Its timber walls were scarred by decades of wind and ice, the green paint long surrendered to gray. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney, dissolving into the snowfall. Inside lived Ethan Cole, 42, broad-shouldered and solid through the chest, with the posture of a man who had once learned how to carry other people when their legs no longer worked. His movements were deliberate, economical, shaped by years as a wildfire firefighter and backcountry rescue operator, jobs where hesitation killed quietly and heroics came too late. Ethan's face was angular, cut with sharp cheekbones and a squared jaw that still held a permanent shadow of dark stubble. His hair, once kept regulation short, had grown uneven, dark brown threaded with early gray, trimmed by his own hand when it annoyed him enough. His eyes were a washed steel blue, the kind that seemed calm until they weren't, trained to scan for danger even when no one else believed it existed. Ethan had not always chosen isolation. Isolation had arrived after a winter rescue 6 years earlier, when a wind shift trapped his team on a ridge fire, and the man tethered to him, his closest friend, slipped on ice and vanished into smoke and flame before Ethan's grip could save him. The report said unavoidable conditions. Ethan's body disagreed. Since then, noise unsettled him, crowds drained him, and the sound of radios crackling with urgency left his chest tight and his palms damp. The ranger station offered silence without judgment. Trees didn't ask questions. Snow didn't expect explanations. Near the iron stove lay Atlas, a 4-year-old German shepherd, with a powerful athletic frame and a coat of dense black and warm brown that gleamed even in low light. His muzzle was dark, his ears tall and expressive, and his amber eyes carried an alert intelligence that never truly powered down. Atlas had come through a support program for former rescue workers, trained to interrupt panic responses and anchor fractured attention. But somewhere along the way, the dog had gone beyond training. Atlas didn't just respond, he anticipated. He watched Ethan's breathing, adjusted to his silences, and seemed to understand when memories pressed too close. Where Ethan's instincts had learned to distrust calm, Atlas trusted it fiercely. That evening, Ethan sat at the rough wooden table with a mug of coffee he'd reheated twice and forgotten to drink. Outside, the wind rose and fell like a restless animal, pushing snow sideways through the trees. Dusk drained from the sky, turning the forest into layered shadows. Ethan told himself it was just weather, the kind that moved through these parts every winter. Still, he found his shoulders tightening, his attention snagging on the sound of branches knocking together like distant knocks at a door no one wanted to open. Atlas lifted his head, not slowly, not curiously, but all at once, muscles snapping into readiness. His ears angled forward, nostrils flaring as he pulled scent through the air. A low sound built in his chest. Not a growl, not a bark, but something sharper, urgent, edged with fear that did not belong to him. He sprang to his feet, nails clicking once against the floor, before he lunged toward the door. "Easy," Ethan said automatically, his voice calm by habit rather than certainty. He pushed his chair back, pulse already accelerating. Atlas ignored the command. He barked, short, piercing, unmistakably human-directed. It was not the bark for deer or bears or wandering snowmobilers. This was different. This was the sound Atlas made only when someone else's survival was slipping. Ethan stood frozen for a single breath. The old argument flared in him, fast and familiar. "Not your job anymore. You didn't hear anything. Let someone else answer the call." He reached for his jacket anyway, thick canvas worn soft at the elbows, the weight of it grounding against his shoulders. Atlas scratched at the door once, then looked back at Ethan, eyes bright and unblinking, as if the choice had already been made and Ethan was simply late catching up. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. Snow stung his cheeks as the door banged shut behind them. Atlas surged forward into the trees, moving with confident urgency, cutting a clean line through brush and drifts. Ethan followed, boots crunching over crusted snow, breath fogging white in front of his face. The marsh lay ahead, hidden beneath reeds and ice, a place locals avoided even in daylight. As they moved deeper, Ethan's senses sharpened, old training dragging him into the present. He noticed the way the wind carried sound unevenly, how the snow muffled distance, how darkness gathered faster near water. Then he heard it. A sound thin enough to be missed if you weren't listening for it. A broken cry, cut short by cold. Human, female, close. Atlas veered left, slowing now, careful. Ethan's flashlight swept across the reeds and caught movement. An arm rising, slipping, vanishing again into dark water and mud. She was half submerged near the frozen edge of the marsh, trapped where ice met sucking earth. Her name, he would later learn, was Nora Hayes, 29, a deputy with the county sheriff's department. In that moment, she was simply a woman fighting not to disappear. She was of average height, compact and athletic, built for endurance rather than bulk. Her dark blonde hair clung wetly to her face, pulled loose from what had once been a tight ponytail. Her skin was pale beneath streaks of mud, lips blue with cold, freckles standing out stark against the gray. Her eyes, hazel, sharp despite exhaustion, locked onto Ethan with the raw focus of someone who understood exactly how close the end was. "Don't move," Ethan called, dropping to his knees and spreading his weight carefully. His voice held the steady authority of a man who had said those words hundreds of times and meant them every time. Atlas lay flat beside him without command, pressing his body low to distribute weight, eyes never leaving Nora. She tried to nod, a shaky attempt at humor flickering across her face, before pain tightened her mouth again. One hand clutched a frozen reed, knuckles white. The other trembled uncontrollably. Ethan assessed fast. Thin ice, deep mud. Panic had already dragged her down once. He anchored himself, slid his rescue line forward inch by inch, speaking continuously, not to reassure himself but to keep her present, breathing, attached to his voice. Atlas whined softly, tail stiff, a sound like a held prayer. When Ethan finally got the line around her, it was Atlas who shifted first, bracing his weight so Ethan could pull without sinking them all. Together, man and dog, they eased Nora free of the marsh's grip. She collapsed onto the snow, coughing violently, chest heaving. Ethan wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, the canvas darkening instantly with water. Up close he saw the details that unsettled him most. The scrape marks on her wrists, the panic that didn't quite fade, even when she was safe. The way her eyes flicked past him toward the trees, as if expecting someone else to step out of the snow. Atlas followed her gaze and growled low, not at her, but at the darkness beyond. Ethan looked at the forest, at the falling snow, and felt the quiet certainty settle in his bones. This wasn't an accident, and whatever had chased Nora Hayes into the frozen marsh hadn't finished its hunt yet. He helped her to her feet one careful step at a time and turned back toward the ranger station, unaware that by answering Atlas's call, he had already stepped back into a world he'd sworn to leave behind. The ranger station door slammed shut against the wind, and with it, the illusion of safety settled only halfway into the room like a blanket that warmed the skin but left the bones cold. Ethan guided Nora Hayes inside with steady hands. Each step measured, each breath counted. Snow clung to her boots and pant legs, melting into dark puddles on the warped wooden floor. The fire crackled in the iron stove, throwing orange light across the walls, and Atlas moved ahead of them, positioning himself between the door and the woman without being told, his broad back rigid, ears angled forward as if listening to something far beyond the reach of human hearing. Nora sank onto the edge of a narrow bench near the stove, shoulders hunched, teeth chattering despite the heat. Up close, Ethan could see how young she really was, not just in age, but in the tightness of her skin, the absence of old scars that marked a life spent being hit and getting back up again. Her face was narrow, high cheekbones flushed raw from cold, freckles scattered like constellations across the bridge of her nose. Strands of dark blonde hair escaped their tie and stuck to her temples, damp and curling from heat. She carried herself with a stubborn kind of control, the sort that didn't demand attention, but refused to collapse even when collapse would have been easier. "You're safe," Ethan said, though the words tasted provisional. He knelt and cut away the frozen laces of her boot with a small utility knife, careful not to nick skin. His hands were large, scarred, and moved with practiced confidence, the same hands that had once lifted fallen hikers and unconscious firefighters from places no one else could reach. At least for the moment. Nora let out a breath that might have been a laugh in a different life. Moments better than none. Her voice was hoarse, low, edged with exhaustion rather than fear. She glanced at Atlas, who stood close enough that his shoulder brushed her knee. "He found me," she said. "He does that," Ethan replied. Atlas's amber eyes never left her face, reading, measuring. When Nora shifted, wincing as pain shot through her shoulder, Atlas leaned closer, grounding her with warmth and weight. The dog was 4 years old, but carried himself like something older, something that understood duty without resenting it. His coat steamed faintly as snow melted into fur, dark muzzle flecked with ice crystals. Ethan fetched a wool blanket from the bunk room and draped it around Nora's shoulders. then poured hot water into a dented metal mug and stirred in instant broth. "Small sips," he instructed. "Shock doesn't announce itself politely." Nora obeyed without argument, fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the mug. Ethan noticed the abrasions on her wrists now that the mud had washed away. Parallel scrapes, angry red against pale skin, restraint marks. Her gaze followed his, and something hardened behind her eyes. "I didn't slip," she said quietly, as if confirming what he already knew. "They tried to put me in a car. I ran." Ethan nodded once. He had learned long ago that denial wasted time. He stood and moved to the small window, lifting the curtain just enough to scan the tree line. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, erasing footprints, forgiving nothing. "Who's they?" Nora hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." She swallowed another mouthful of broth. "I need to get warm first. Think straight." Ethan accepted that. He'd been trained to prioritize bodies before stories. He took a first aid kit from a shelf and checked her shoulder, fingers gentle but firm. The joint was swollen, beginning to bruise. "Likely a partial dislocation," he said. "Hurts like hell, but it'll hold if you don't test it." She gave a tight smile. "I won't." Atlas shifted suddenly, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. He wasn't looking at Nora anymore. He was staring at the corner of the room where her discarded jacket lay in a damp heap. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The jacket was heavy-duty, black with reflective striping, the kind issued to deputies who worked rural routes. One sleeve was torn near the cuff, the fabric snagged as if caught on something sharp. "What?" Ethan asked. "Don't," Nora said too quickly. "Don't move that." Ethan paused. Years of rescue work had taught him to respect urgency, even when it arrived wrapped in fear. He crouched near the jacket without touching it. "Why?" "There's something inside," Nora said. Her jaw tightened, jawline sharp in the firelight. "Not in the lining, in the battery pack, my body cam." Ethan looked up at her. "A tracker." She nodded once. Atlas growled again, deeper this time, the sound carrying disapproval rather than alarm. Ethan removed the body camera with care, prying open the cracked casing. Inside, nestled where a standard power cell should have been, was a small, sealed device no larger than a matchbox. A green light pulsed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. "Still live," Ethan murmured. Nora pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I figured it would be." She met his eyes, and in them he saw not panic, but resolve sharpened by betrayal. "Someone wanted to know where I ended up, and someone wanted me gone." Ethan stood, weighing the device in his hand. The room felt smaller now, the walls thinner. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying sound in strange, distorted ways. "You said you ran," he said. "What were you running from?" Nora took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm a deputy with the county," she began. 6 years on the job, mostly boring stuff. Snowed-in roads, domestic calls, lost tourists who think GPS works in forests." Her lips twitched briefly. "A few months ago we started seeing seizures, overdoses that didn't make sense, prescriptions that checked out on paper but didn't behave, like anything in the books." Ethan listened, silent, eyes on the dark window. "I followed the supply chain," she continued. "Found shipments routed through private land near the wetlands. Stuff labeled as trial medication. Someone inside was helping move it. I copied files, downloaded footage." She glanced at the small backpack by her feet. "It's all there." "And your colleagues?" Ethan asked. "Some of them," she said. Not all enough. Her fingers curled into the blanket. When they realized I wasn't going to let it go, they stopped trying to scare me. Atlas stepped closer, resting his chin briefly on her knee, as if sealing an unspoken promise. Nora blinked and looked down at him, a softness breaking through the steel. "You don't miss much, do you?" she murmured. A sudden sound cut through the quiet, a distant engine, low and muffled, carried on the wind. Ethan's head snapped up, Atlas's ears flattened forward, body tense. Nora froze. "They're close," she whispered. Ethan moved without panic, but with urgency honed by experience. He killed the overhead lantern, plunging the room into deeper shadow broken only by the stove's glow. He wrapped the tracker in a rag, then slipped it into a waterproof pouch. "If they're following that signal, they'll come here," he said. "We need to decide what kind of welcome they get." Nora watched him, studying the set of his shoulders, the calm precision of his movements. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I dragged this to your door." Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment, the weight of years pressed behind his eyes. "I spent a long time pretending that if I stayed quiet, trouble would pass me by," he said. "It doesn't work that way." He clipped the pouch shut and handed her a mug of water. "Drink, then we move." Atlas let out a single sharp bark, not loud but decisive. Outside, headlights flickered faintly through the trees, diffused by snow. Someone was testing the dark. Ethan crouched beside Nora. "When I say go, you go," he instructed. "Atlas stays with you." The dog's tail thumped once, solemn agreement. Nora nodded, fear flickering but not consuming. She had survived the ice. She could survive this. As footsteps crunched somewhere beyond the station, Ethan opened the back door just enough to let the cold rush in. Snow swirled like ash in the wind, swallowing sound, swallowing light. He glanced once more at the woman by the fire and the dog guarding her, then stepped into the night, carrying the pulsing green heartbeat of the tracker away from the only shelter for miles. Behind him, Atlas settled beside Nora, eyes fixed on the door, breath steady. The cry beneath the ice had been answered, but the night was far from finished. The fire hissed softly as melting snow dripped from Ethan's jacket onto the stone hearth, and for a moment the ranger station felt like a fragile island floating in an ocean of white. Nora coughed again, deep and ragged, her body still fighting the cold she had swallowed beneath the ice. She lifted her head, eyes locking not on Ethan, but on the dark shape of her jacket hanging from a nail near the wall. "Don't put it near the window," she said hoarsely. The urgency in her voice was sharper than pain. Ethan paused mid-motion. He had been about to move the jacket closer to the fire. Atlas, stretched along the floor like a living barricade, raised his head at the same time, ears angling forward. The dog did not bark. He growled low, almost thoughtfully, a sound reserved for things that wore danger quietly. "Why?" Ethan asked. Nora swallowed, her throat working as if the answer itself weighed something. "Because the tracker isn't in the jacket." She shifted carefully, wincing as her injured shoulder protested. It's in the spare battery attached to my body camera. Someone switched it before my shift." Ethan's jaw tightened. He retrieved the body cam from Nora's belt. With measured care, the device was cracked along one corner, its casing spidered from impact, likely when she fell or was pushed. Ethan turned it in his hands, thumbs testing seams. Years of rescue work had taught him how equipment failed and how it was altered when failure was intentional. With a small flat blade, he pried open the battery compartment. Inside, nestled where no standard component belonged, sat a compact transmitter sealed in black resin. A tiny green light pulsed steadily, patient and alive. Atlas rose to his feet and took one step closer, hackles lifting just slightly along his broad shoulders. His amber eyes fixed on the device with unmistakable hostility. "That thing shouldn't exist," Nora said quietly. "Neither should the people who put it there." Ethan wrapped the transmitter in a cloth and set it on the table, keeping distance from the windows. "Start from the beginning," he said. His voice was calm, but there was no softness left in it. This was the tone of a man who had learned the cost of half-truths. Nora drew a slow breath. In the firelight, her features looked sharper, more defined. She was 29, but stress had carved faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from age, but from vigilance. Her skin was pale now, freckles stark against the flush of returning warmth. She looked like someone who slept lightly, who trusted slowly, who carried responsibility without ceremony. "I grew up not far from here," she began. "Small town. People waved at cops like we were part of the scenery. I believed in that. Believed the badge meant you stood between ordinary people and the worst of the world." A faint, humorless smile touched her mouth and vanished. "I still do. That's the problem." She explained how routine traffic stops near the winter access roads had begun to feel wrong. Too many vehicles with out-of-state plates. Too many sealed medical containers moving through private logging land under the excuse of research transport. Prescription labels that checked out on paper but didn't match chemical reports from overdose victims. "I requested records," she continued, "got blocked, asked questions, got warned. I didn't stop." Her eyes hardened. "That's when they noticed me." Ethan listened without interruption, leaning against the counter, arms folded. The old scars on his forearms caught the light, thin white lines from burns and cuts earned pulling strangers out of fire and wreckage. He recognized the shape of Nora's story the way one recognizes bad weather long before the clouds arrive. "I copied everything I could," Nora said, nodding toward her backpack. "Internal memos, shipment logs, body cam footage of exchanges they didn't think anyone would question. I planned to take it out of the county tonight. Snow was supposed to cover my tracks." Her jaw clenched. They decided to let the swamp do their work instead. Silence stretched. Outside, the wind dragged snow against the walls in slow, restless sheets. Ethan thought of the winter 6 years ago, of radios crackling with static, of flames crawling faster than men could run, of the moment his grip failed by inches. He had told himself afterward that withdrawal was wisdom, that isolation was survival. Listening to Nora, he understood the lie for what it was. "You didn't just run," he said. "You were hunted." Nora met his gaze. "Yes." Atlas stepped closer to her, pressing his flank against her leg, a steady, grounding presence. She rested her uninjured hand briefly against his thick fur, fingers sinking into warmth. The dog accepted the touch with quiet gravity, as if acknowledging a pact already formed. A sound drifted through the trees then, faint, almost lost beneath the wind. An engine idling low. Ethan's head snapped toward the door. Atlas stiffened, posture sharp and alert. Nora's breath caught. "They're closer than they should be," Ethan said. He crossed the room and extinguished the lantern, leaving only firelight. Shadows deepened, stretching long and uncertain. He retrieved a waterproof pouch from a drawer and placed the transmitter inside. If they're following this signal, they'll come here, he said. I won't let that happen. You're going to take it, Nora said, realization dawning. Yes. Her eyes widened, not with fear for herself, but for him. Ethan, you don't know how many of them there are. I know enough, he replied, and I know this terrain better than they ever will. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eye level. Atlas stays with you. He won't leave unless I say so. Atlas gave a low, affirming huff, tail barely moving. Outside, headlights swept briefly. Across the tree line, pale beams diffused by snowfall. Someone was circling, testing, waiting. Ethan slipped his jacket back on and secured the pouch inside. At the door, he hesitated, not from fear, but from memory. He looked once more at Nora, pale, injured but unbroken, and at the German shepherd guarding her like an oath made flesh. I spent years hiding from calls like this, he said quietly. I won't ignore this one. He stepped into the night. Snow swallowed him almost immediately, erasing his outline, muting his footsteps. The green pulse of the transmitter beat steadily against his chest as he moved away from the station, drawing danger after him like a deliberate trail. Inside, Atlas lay down beside Nora, eyes fixed on the door, breath calm and measured. Nora closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. The swamp had failed to take her, the cold had failed. And now the truth, buried in a broken camera, was finally moving toward daylight. The storm continued to fall, patient and indifferent, as choices made inside the forgotten ranger station reshaped the night beyond it. The night thickened until it felt almost solid, as if the snow itself had learned how to listen. It still fell steadily over the Upper Peninsula, soft flakes drifting through the dark, but the sound had changed. Between each hush of snowfall crept noises that did not belong to weather. Boots compressing frozen mud, tires easing along an iced logging road, the faint click-pop of a radio keyed too carefully to be accidental. Ethan Cole moved through the forest, like a man who had once trusted chaos with his life, and learned when to argue with it. His broad frame blended with the shadows of spruce and pine, canvas jacket dusted white, breath slowed to a controlled rhythm. The transmitter pulsed against his chest, a steady green heartbeat he allowed to lead the hunters where he wanted them to look. Years ago, Ethan would have charged headlong into danger. Tonight he hunted angles and silence. Survival had taught him patience. Loss had sharpened it. Behind him, the ranger station crouched, dark and quiet. Its single promise embodied by Atlas, who lay near the door with his massive head resting on his paws, amber eyes unblinking. The German shepherd's coat was still damp from melted snow, black and brown fur catching the faint firelight. At 4 years old, Atlas carried himself with the discipline of something older, a creature forged by training but softened by loyalty. Nora Hayes sat on the bench nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her injured shoulder immobilized against her body. She did not pace or panic. She watched. Her hazel eyes tracked every sound, every absence of sound, the way a good deputy learned to do when instinct said danger was circling but had not yet shown its teeth. The first vehicle stopped half a mile out, engine dying into the snow. Then a second, quieter approach, tires cutting shallow lines that the snowfall immediately began to erase. Captain Grant Mercer stepped out into the night with the calm confidence of a man who had never been denied entry anywhere that mattered. He was 45, tall and lean, with symmetrical features that looked as though they had been designed for recruitment posters. Clean jawline, straight nose, hair dark with just enough gray at the temples to suggest authority rather than age. His face wore a faint, practiced smile, the kind that reassured civilians and unsettled people who knew better. Mercer's eyes were pale, almost colorless in the dark, and utterly cold. Years earlier, a career-ending scandal in a neighboring county had taught him a single lesson. Power survived best when it learned to look reasonable. At his side walked Dylan Rourke, 26, slighter in build, shoulders hunched against the cold. Dylan's hair was cut too short, almost shaved, revealing a narrow skull and ears that stuck out just enough to betray nervous energy. His face was sharp, unfinished, dotted with patchy stubble he hadn't learned how to maintain. He wore his confidence like borrowed clothing, tight in the shoulders, loose at the seams. Dylan held a handheld signal scanner, eyes flicking between the glowing screen and the darkness ahead. He was good with machines, fast with data, and terrible with patience. That combination had made him useful and dangerous in equal measure. The signal's moving, Dylan muttered, breath fogging. Away from the station. Mercer nodded, unhurried. Then our guest learned something, he said softly. Good. I prefer educated prey. His voice carried easily, smooth as warmed glass. Let's knock anyway. He motioned toward the ranger station. One of the other men, faceless in the dark, built thick and silent, moved ahead and rapped once on the door, not hard, not gentle, just enough to announce presence. Inside, Nora's muscles tightened. Atlas rose instantly, placing his body between her and the door, hackles lifting a fraction. He did not bark. He did not whine. He waited. Sheriff's Department, Mercer called, voice warm, almost friendly. We're looking for a deputy who may be injured. Nora closed her eyes for half a second, steadying herself. Atlas's tail brushed her boot, grounding her in the moment. She did not answer. Silence was a language she knew how to speak. Outside, Mercer listened. Snow ticked softly against his coat. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a light flickered once, high above the tree line. A rescue strobe, faint but unmistakable. There, Dylan said, excitement sharpening his tone. Signal spike near that light. Mercer smiled, thin and satisfied. Of course. What Mercer did not see was Ethan, already knee-deep in reeds near the frozen edge of the marsh, working with methodical care. He secured the transmitter inside a battered orange life ring, its foam cracked from age. He tied it beneath a slab of driftwood, weighted just enough to float low and steady. The marsh current was slow but persistent, sliding beneath a skin of ice toward the darker channels beyond. When Ethan eased the ring into the water, it vanished soundlessly, carrying the green pulse away like a deliberate lie. Then he triggered the strobe he had rigged earlier, a Forest Service emergency beacon salvaged years ago, now hoisted high in a pine. Its rhythmic flash cut through the snowfall, an irresistible lure for anyone trained to follow signals. Dylan was already moving toward it, boots slipping as he entered the reeds. "I'll check it," he said, eager. "Careful," Mercer replied, though there was no urgency in the word. If Dylan failed, someone else would learn. The marsh swallowed sound quickly. Dylan advanced with the scanner held out, eyes fixed on the numbers. He did not see Ethan until the world tilted and the ground vanished beneath him. Ethan struck fast and clean, a forearm locking across Dylan's chest, driving him down into the cold mud. The scanner splashed away. Dylan gasped, panic flaring bright and loud. "Easy," Ethan whispered, voice low and controlled. Breathe. Dylan struggled, fear making him clumsy. He reached back blindly, fingers scraping against Ethan's jacket. Then Atlas emerged from the darkness like a living shadow, teeth bared inches from Dylan's throat. The German shepherd's growl vibrated through the air, a promise more than a threat. Dylan froze, his breath hitched, shallow and rapid. Ethan bound Dylan's wrists with practiced efficiency, tight enough to hold, loose enough to keep blood flowing. He did not strike the young man again. There was no need. Dylan's eyes were wide, reflecting the strobe's distant flash. "I didn't want this," Dylan whispered. Ethan met his gaze, steel blue eyes, unreadable. "Most people never do," he said, and moved on. Mercer's voice drifted through the snow, calm and unhurried. "Nora," he called, as if inviting her in for coffee. "You can end this now." Inside the ranger station, Nora's jaw tightened. Atlas stood immovable at her side, his body a barrier and a vow. She did not answer. She did not need to. Ethan melted back into the trees, circling wide, letting Mercer believe the hunt was unfolding on his terms. The snow kept falling, patient and impartial, erasing tracks, swallowing mistakes. Mercer stepped closer to the marsh, pale eyes scanning shadows. He sensed something wrong, not fear, but disruption. The forest was no longer behaving as expected. Behind him, the strobe flashed again, drawing attention away. The tracker pulsed somewhere downstream, far from where Ethan now moved. For the first time that night, Mercer's smile faltered. The knock at the ranger station echoed again, louder this time. Atlas answered with a single deep bark. Not rage, but warning. Nora's hand rested against his neck, steady. She was not hiding anymore, she was waiting, and in the snowbound darkness between them all, the hunt turned, quiet and inevitable, as the storm chose no side and watched men reveal what they truly were. Dawn approached without ceremony, the way it often did in the Upper Peninsula, not as a sudden arrival, but as a thinning of darkness, a loosening of night's grip. The snow eased from a determined fall into scattered drifts, and the forest exhaled, branches shedding white in soft cicadas. Ethan Cole moved steadily through the trees, his broad frame cutting a careful path, one hand gripping a rope sling that supported Nora Hayes as they crossed a narrow ridge toward the fire tower. He looked the same as he had hours before, angular face set with quiet resolve, dark stubble shadowing his jaw, steel blue eyes alert, but something inside him had shifted, like a muscle remembering its purpose. Nora leaned on him when the slope steepened, her compact, athletic body still weak from cold and injury, but her posture upright, stubborn. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back again, messy but functional, cheeks flushed now with more than just survival. She carried her backpack tight against her body, the weight of evidence inside it heavier than its size suggested. Atlas ranged ahead of them, black and brown coat dusted with snow, amber eyes scanning, ears rotating constantly. At 4 years old, he moved with the confidence of a seasoned guardian, yet every so often he glanced back to ensure both humans followed, as if shepherding them through the last stretch of night. The fire tower rose above the trees like a skeletal promise, metal stairs rimed with frost, its glassed-in cabin catching the first dull light of morning. Ethan checked the perimeter before ushering Nora inside, methodical as ever. The radio equipment hummed softly when powered on, a sound that once would have tightened his chest. This time it did not. Nora seated herself at the narrow desk, fingers steady despite exhaustion, and connected the USB drive and memory cards. As the progress bar crept forward, She closed her eyes briefly, breathing through the moment. "If this works," she said quietly, "there's no going back." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the tree line through the windows. "There shouldn't be," he replied. The upload completed with a soft chime. Nora keyed in encrypted credentials and sent everything, shipment logs, body cam footage, internal messages, directly to the State Investigative Unit. She sat back, shoulders sagging for the first time, not in defeat, but release. Outside, Atlas let out a single low bark, not alarmed but declarative, as if announcing that the night had lost its claim. By the time state vehicles reached the outer logging roads, the story had already begun to unravel on its own. Captain Grant Mercer's name surfaced first, then others, like rot exposed when snow melted too fast. Phone calls were made, alliances dissolved, and men who had believed themselves untouchable discovered how quickly loyalty evaporated under light. Mercer was taken in quietly, his poster-perfect face unreadable as cuffs closed around his wrists. He did not look at the forest when they led him away. He looked straight ahead, as if still convinced that reason could save him. Weeks passed, then months. Michigan shifted seasons reluctantly, winter loosening into a cautious spring, and then almost shyly into summer. Green returned to the wetlands, reeds standing tall where ice had once claimed a life. The ranger station no longer felt like a bunker holding its breath. Windows opened, light stayed. Nora Hayes began her new assignment with the state's Internal Investigations Unit on a humid Monday morning. She wore plain clothes now, jeans, a light jacket, her badge clipped discreetly at her waist. At 29, she looked younger without the constant edge of pursuit carved into her features, but her eyes had changed. They were steadier, more deliberate. When she walked into the office, conversation dimmed. No one applauded. No one smiled too quickly. She recognized it for what it was: caution, respect's quieter cousin. Ethan remained at the ranger station, though it no longer felt like exile. He repaired the roof in June, sanded the table he'd nearly forgotten to use, and began hiking the perimeter trails again, not as escape, but stewardship. His shoulders still carried the breadth of a rescuer, his movements still economical, but his silences had softened. They were no longer places to hide, but spaces to breathe. The scars on his forearms did not fade, but they stopped defining the shape of his days. Atlas thrived in summer. His coat shone thick and healthy, and his posture relaxed without losing vigilance. He balanced what Ethan jokingly called a soldier's brain with a puppy's heart. Patrol first, play immediately after. He insisted on a thrown tennis ball as faithfully as he once insisted on guarding the door, as if healing required repetition to be trusted. One bright afternoon, sunlight filtering through the trees like an apology that arrived late but sincere, a dusty blue pickup truck turned down the gravel road. Atlas noticed it before Ethan did, ears lifting, tail swaying. Nora stepped out with a paper carrier in one hand and a small bag in the other. She looked different now, still compact and strong, but lighter somehow. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, skin warmed by sun rather than fear. She lifted the bag. "Peace offering," she said. "Coffee and contractual obligations." Ethan raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. "He sign yet?" Atlas sat immediately, spine straight, expression solemn, tail thumping like a metronome. "He did," Ethan replied. Mandatory biscuits per visit. They sat on the porch with chipped mugs, listening to birds argue in the trees. Atlas chased the ball with undiminished enthusiasm, returning it to Nora once, to Ethan once, fair in all things. Nora spoke of her work, of interviews that grew quieter as facts grew louder, of nights that still carried echoes but no longer owned her. Sleep. Ethan listened, nodding when words ran out, understanding that some truths did not need answers. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across ground that had once been nothing but ice and mud, Nora stood to leave. She hesitated at the steps, then turned back. "I know you didn't ask for any of this," she said, "but I wouldn't be here without you." Ethan looked past her, toward the wetlands now alive with green. "Nobody gets out alone," he said, voice steady. Atlas dropped the ball at their feet, asking the only question that mattered. Nora laughed, genuine and unguarded, and threw it once more, the light caught in drifting dust, in leaves, in the dog's moving form, and for a moment it was clear winter had tried to swallow them all and failed, not because of force, not because of noise, but because someone followed the right call, even when their hands shook, and because a four-legged guardian ran ahead into the snow and refused to stop. The storm had passed. What remained was something quieter and stronger for it. Sometimes we wait for miracles to arrive with thunder and fire, believing that if God truly intervenes, the sky must split open and the world must stop. But more often, his miracles come quietly. They come as a steady hand when we are sinking, as a loyal companion who hears our cry before anyone else does, as the courage to choose what is right, even when fear tells us to stay hidden. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes he sends the strength to walk through it. Sometimes he sends the right people at the right moment. And sometimes he sends a dog with 4 determined paws, leading a wounded heart back toward the light. In our daily lives, many of us are fighting battles no one else can see. We carry grief, regret, exhaustion, and questions we never planned to ask. If this story reminds us of anything, it is this: you are not alone. Even when the night feels endless, God is still working in the silence between the raindrops. If this story touched your heart, share it, because someone you know may be standing in their own storm right now. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or how God has shown up in your life when you least expected it. And if you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and hope that refuses to disappear, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you through every winter you face. And may you always recognize the miracle, even when it arrives softly.